confess that you made up the COVID rules, including 6 feet
I didn't hear what you said.
social distancing.
I never said I made anything up.
You admitted that you made it. You
I
made
didn't
it up.
say
as you
I
went.
made it up.
Listen to this Weasley maneuver.
What did you say?
I said that it is not based in science and it just appeared. It is not based in science and it just appeared.
I like this guy's expression.
This thing, the most important thing, the perfect solution is the 6-foot rule. The 6-foot rule. The 6-foot rule.
There was no science behind it.
What?
There was no trial that looked at 10 versus 6 versus 3 versus not even worrying about it at all. And since there was no clinical trials going one way or the other, that's why it was accepted by the group.
What?
There was no science behind it. There was no science behind it. On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
What color tie are you wearing?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
What color's the carpet in front of you?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Let's just get one thing straight. You don't have any rights under the Fifth Amendment because you've been pardoned, as you very well know. As the Supreme Court has been clear for a century and more, Brown versus Walker, 1896, when he has been pardoned, he may not stand upon his privilege. You know that. Your lawyers sitting behind you now shifting nervously in their chairs. They know it. This isn't about the Constitution. This isn't about the law. This is about contempt. Contempt for this body and contempt for the American people.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Actuali Podcast in our series Meaning Making 101, where we try to make sense of this world together. We've got to stop the infighting. We've got to stop playing into this divide and conquer methodology. Super sophisticated psychological operations are at play, and they are very effectively pitting us against one another, and they're causing us to self-destruct, destroy our nations from the inside out. So let's stop that. We do have the capacity to do this thing, and these are great problems that are quite beyond the reach of any one human mind. Let's do that. Instead of infighting, let's start figuring these things out together. Last episode, we covered several bombshell level COVID revelations. Ever since the release of Anthony Fauci's diary entries on government servers, he was making these daily entries, I guess thinking that no one was ever going to find them, but they were super self-incriminating. And we find out how many times Anthony Fauci has lied to the American public. And let's go ahead and just jump right on over here, fam. If you did not watch part 1 of the COVID bombshells, make sure that you check that out too. There's a lot in there for you guys. And I want you to utilize this to share with friends and family who may have doubted your opinion during COVID. If you are one of those people that managed to hold back from taking the shot or even just had questions. There was no science behind it. There were no clinical trials. That's why it was accepted. Oh, what? Okay, let's see what this has to say.
CDC is advising all Americans now to wear a cloth mask. Why the change now? Because most of us have been walking around going to the grocery store not wearing the mask because that was the original recommendation.
Well, we have to make sure we don't forget that the most important thing is to keep the 6-foot physical distance from individuals.
However, you testified recently, and I'm quoting, this 6-foot rule sort of just appeared.
Staying 6 feet away from people.
This 6-foot rule
Staying 6 feet apart.
crippled businesses.
Maintaining 6 feet of distance.
Allowed students to stay at home and not learn.
So important. Maintaining distance of 6 feet or more.
Do you think that a rule that sort of just appeared is substantial justification for the regulations that we saw based on that 6-foot rule?
6 feet apart.
CDC was responsible for those kinds of guidelines, not me.
I would recommend doing what the CDC, as I think appropriately and correctly said, staying 6 feet away. The perfect solution to this is if everyone stays 6 feet separated, 6 feet away, stay 6 feet apart, 6 feet distance, 6 foot distance, no, 6 feet apart, 6 feet away, 6 feet away. That's our most important tool.
It had little to do with me since I didn't make the recommendation. And I think we should just follow carefully the CDC recommendations. We must abide by public health measures. The usual 6 feet apart.
Very important, 6 foot distance. Stay 6 feet apart, 6 foot rule.
It actually came from the CDC, not me.
But I would recommend 6 feet of distance.
The 6-foot rule, the social distancing, which you said sort of just appeared. The 6-foot rule, you know, it's almost irrelevant. Almost irrelevant. Almost irrelevant.
It's so important. The social distancing of 6 feet, 6 feet or more. 6 feet, stay 6 feet apart, 6 feet apart. The most important thing.
It's almost irrelevant.
The biggest thing.
Almost irrelevant.
The perfect solution.
Almost irrelevant.
If everyone at all times stay 6 feet separated, 6 feet away, 6 feet apart, at least 6 feet. The biggest thing, the most important thing, the perfect solution is the 6-foot rule. The 6-foot rule. The 6-foot rule.
There was no science behind it.
What?
There was no trial that looked at 10 versus 6 versus 3 versus not even worrying about it at all. And since there was no clinical trials going one way or the other, that's why it was accepted by the group.
What?
There was no science behind it. There was no science behind it. And that's one of the things that's, I think, such a good thing about our system here, is that we're ruled by the science. There was no science behind it.
Confess that you made up the COVID rules, including 6 feet
I didn't hear what you said.
social distancing.
I never said I made anything up.
You admitted that you made it. You
I
made it
didn't
up.
say I made it up.
Listen to this Weasley maneuver.
What did you say?
I said that it is not based in science and it just appeared. It is not based in science and it just appeared.
I like this guy's expression. What?
If you are in science, you've got to direct what you do, what you recommend, your policies based on scientific data and evidence. And you've got to be consistent
And you've always got to be truthful to tell people what they may not like to hear.
Did you not feel an obligation for something that just sort of appeared, not to go back to the CDC and say, let's base this on what we know? It was a CDC decision, and you didn't feel an obligation as the lead scientist at the NIH to challenge that. It is not appropriate to be publicly challenging a sister organization. As the lead scientist, it is not.
Okay, so this was before the Senate hearing on the 29th, but you guys get the picture. This was when he was brought before previously and questioned. Now that the evidence has come out, his diary entries has come out, he's totally changed the tune. But we'll get there. Stay tuned, because I got some other bombshells to drop before we get there. And let's just remember the way the media gaslighted us as well. Remember those recommendations that Fauci was just talking
President
about.
Trump wrote on Twitter, don't be afraid of COVID. Don't let it dominate your life. Don't let it dominate your life.
In terms of responding to a comment like that, it's gross.
It's okay to be afraid of COVID, and it's okay that it's dominating your life.
Everyone should be afraid of COVID.
You shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free.
I can't come in, Mom. It's because of this flu thing.
We won't be free of this pandemic until we listen to the acknowledged truth. Listen to the scientists.
Science is truth.
You know, science is truth.
What is the impact to public health
Science
when
is
people
truth.
are openly questioning the science?
Now is the time to do what you're told.
By not hearing the truth, by not listening to the scientists, they're prolonging how bad the economy will be.
When I see somebody out in the world who's not wearing a mask, I instantly think you are a threat, or you are selfish, or you are a COVID denier, and you definitely haven't been vaccinated.
With the way she just programmed a million minds with that very same thought, and then people started acting that way out in the streets. I remember this shit. People were parroting the rhetoric they were picking up off of these kinds of media personalities that were just literally just scaremongering the hell out of
Or you are
everyone.
selfish. See somebody out in the world who's not wearing a mask, I instantly think you are a threat, or you are selfish, or you are a COVID denier, and you definitely haven't been vaccinated.
You don't wear a mask in the house. What is that? Are you vaccinated? I am triple vaccinated. Why are you wearing a mask?
Seek out the scientists and listen to their advice.
Listen to scientists. Listen to the scientists.
Trust the experts.
We're going to trust science. We're going to trust the experts. Parents who say, well, I need to do my own research. Makes you think of that cartoon I saw, the tombstone that said, I did my own research.
Republicans have given their voters license to believe whatever they want to believe.
Heard somebody saying, listen to the scientists, do that.
Let's listen to the scientists.
Yeah, listen to the CNN-approved scientists, guys. Only them, though.
That
Not
phrase, do
the
your own
other
research, is popping up a lot in conversations about coronavirus and about COVID vaccines. Doing your own research. It seems so innocent, but it can have serious consequences. Renee, what are the roots of this phrase? I feel like I used to hear it around QAnon craziness.
Okay, so you get the picture on that one, too. We were gaslighted to the nth degree. And now we're going to get into some really upsetting stuff, guys. RFK Jr. says that America, under Fauci's leadership, suffered 10 times the COVID deaths than we needed to. That's 10 times the COVID deaths per million compared to African countries that barely locked down and never forced vaccine mandates. We had in our country, because of Dr. Fauci's leadership, the highest mortality rate from COVID of any country in the world. We literally did worse than any nation in the world. We had a death rate in our country of 3,000 per million. All the countries in Africa averaged about 350 deaths per million. So 1/10 of what we had in this country, and we're by far, far more industrialized. We are the leading industrialized nation on the planet. What the heck? There were nations like Nigeria and Haiti that had 14 deaths per million population. So that's 1 in 200th the death rate of what we had.
In our country, because of Dr. Fauci's leadership and other reasons, we had the highest mortality rate from COVID of any country in the world.
Yeah.
So we literally did worse than any nation in the world. We had a death rate in our country of 3,000 per million population.
There it is.
There were other countries, for example, Africa. All the countries in Africa averaged about 350 deaths, so 1/10 of what we had in this country. There were nations like Nigeria and Haiti that had 14 per million population, so 1/200th of what we had.
Yeah, and I read it out there because, you know, it's hard to understand RFK Jr., but man, he's doing incredible work. We have a lot of stuff from RFK, and some of you guys might not like RFK, but you should actually look at his evidence and challenge yourself. We have to know the other side too. So if there's something you disagree on a side that you see as against you or whatever, understand their arguments better than they do if you can, if you really want to be able to debate and prove them wrong. That's how you do it. So you got to know the other side, whether you are interested in believing in them or not. You might find that there's actually some good points that update your own point of view. This is important. We gain a more rounded perspective this way. We have to challenge our own conceptions, fam. So in this one, RFK Jr. talks about, and speaking of, The Vigilant Fox is a great resource on X, fam. So check out The Vigilant Fox. Does some great journalism. RFK Jr. says Fauci funded a technique used for hiding human fingerprints on lab-created bugs. The technique is called seamless ligation. This is real. Kennedy explains the only reason anyone would try to hide where a bug comes from would be, of course, for a nefarious purpose. There's no other reason that you would try and hide that this was a human lab-created virus than if it was a weapon, right? Of course, it's a bioweapon in that case. What other reason? If you can come up with one, please list it in the comments. So he, Fauci, funded Ralph Baric to develop a technique called seamless ligation. This is documented. That is a technique for hiding the engineering project. So the signs of the engineering. Normally, when you do that kind of genetic engineering, you can see it and you can say this bug was created in a lab, but he, Ralph Baric, developed a way of hiding all traces of what was developed, and he taught that to the Chinese scientists and to Xi Zhengli, which I believe that was the COVID lady, maybe the bat lady. There is no public health reason for this. It is the opposite of what you would do if you're interested in public health, to teach people how to
Tony
hide.
Fauci can still say,
To hide it only has a nefarious purpose.
what I'm doing is for medical purposes. We're developing these things, and then we're going to develop defenses against them.
Yes, that is the argument for gain of function research when you're adding a function to an existing virus. So you're modifying a virus to add something to it, like making it more able to infect human tissues through the ACE2 receptor, for instance. Now, there are scientists out there that have been doing gain of function research for decades. It's bioweapons, clearly, obviously. They will sometimes try and obfuscate the fact what they're doing is bioweapons by arguing, oh, no, we're just trying to prepare for how certain viruses may come out of the wild and then different ways they may develop so that we can be ready and develop vaccines for them. But that's insane because any virus from the wild can mutate in one of any billions of directions. So you could never possibly test for all those different directions it could possibly go. Really crazy idea, because basically what you're doing is taking from the wild, like in caves deep down in the jungles, hundreds away from human beings. You go into these caves, you find these bats with this crazy super bug, and then you take it into a lab, and then you start playing around with it to see what it could do. But the danger is already now. You've brought a wild virus into a lab where it could now leak. And before it was safe, because it takes generations and generations of mutations for these things to become susceptible to humans. It takes a lot of stages of mutation to get to that point. So anyways, long story short, gain of function research is bullshit. Any scientist worth their ilk, any epidemiologist will tell you that this is the most crazy, dangerous research going on the planet, and we need to stop it ASAP, because all they're doing is developing bioweapons, and they're covering it up with their stupid excuses. The danger, even if they really are trying to protect us against potential future viruses by having these hundreds of labs around the friggin' world, dozens of which we ourselves in the U.S. have been funding. Fauci lied about that too. We're not going to be able to stop future viruses by doing this. We're more likely to release more viruses like what happened at the Wuhan lab. You would think that we would have learned the hard way on this one, but not many people are aware that this was a lab-created bug. As of yet, many people think, and the media is still arguing that this is from wet markets and it came from wild animals, just jumped to humans.
He funded one study that put the lie to all of that. He funded Ralph Baric to develop a technique called seamless ligation. And that is a technique for hiding the engineering project. So you could, normally when you do that kind of engineering, you can see it and you can say that bug was created in a lab. He developed a way of hiding all traces that was developed. And he taught that to the Chinese scientists, to Xi. Okay. And that, there is no public health. It is the opposite of what you would do if you were interested in public
you're bringing
health.
these
it's the
viruses
opposite.
out of
If
the
you're
wild
interested in public health, you would make sure that any kind of tampering you did like that had red flags all over it that says
this is insane.
Made this thing. To teach people how to hide that only has a nefarious purpose.
Yeah, 100%, man. 100%. Okay, let's jump again. So, oh man, Charlie Kirk and RFK Jr. on Bill Gates and Dr. Fauci colluding to vaccinate the entire world. They were summoned to his $147 million mansion in Washington and said, let's form a partnership to vaccinate the whole world and to give immunity to all vaccine companies. Quote from the Epstein emails, fam. Gates owned shares in virtually all pharmaceutical companies. He made hundreds of millions off of this pandemic. It has nothing to do with public health. Listen to this.
Tony Fauci got a call from Bill Gates in the year 2000. Gates brought him out, summons him out to his $147 million mansion out in Lake Washington, Seattle. Sat him down in his library and said, let's form a partnership essentially to vaccinate the whole world and with immunity from liability for the vaccine companies, and to make all Gates partners rich. Gates owns huge shares in virtually all the big pharmaceutical companies, and his philanthropy is what he calls philanthrocapitalism. It is a money-making and power-generating philanthropy. It has nothing to do with public health. The public health outcomes have dropped dramatically. There's many studies that show that the more money a nation takes, an African country, an Asian country takes from Bill Gates for either its agricultural products, agricultural systems,
Wow.
or for its public health systems, the worse public health becomes, a higher infant mortality rate.
That's quite a claim. Listen to that, guys.
A nation takes an African.
The more money an African nation takes, or Asian country takes from Bill Gates for either agricultural product systems,
or for its public health systems,
or for public health,
worse public health becomes, a higher infant mortality
worse
rate. There's
infant mortality rates.
Inverse correlation between the amount of money that these people put into public health and the actual health outcome.
And now we get into the thick of it. Bill Gates to Jeffrey Epstein, March 20 in 2015, the Preparing for Pandemics email. Let's discuss next steps, for example, how to officially involve the WHO and CDC. I hope we can pull this off. You guys can find this in the Epstein files. Please find attached a draft agenda for the meeting on preparing for pandemics as requested. Let's discuss next steps, for example, how to officially involve the WHO and ICRC, i.e. co-branding. Best regards, and I hope we can pull this off. You guys can look this up. Go to, I think it's justice.org. You can find the Epstein files and read them. This is out there. I remember when this one came out, and I wanted to bring it up for this episode specifically. So there is that. Here's some more. Okay. You guys can look this up and try and disprove it. 2015 Jeffrey Epstein file, Preparing for Pandemics. Look at that email. 2015 Peace Institute, Preparing for a Pandemic. Look for that email. 2015 Bill Gates TED Talk, We Are Going to Have a Pandemic. You can find that on YouTube. 2019 Planned Pandemic Occurs.
The greatest risk of global catastrophe doesn't look like this. Instead, it looks like this. If anything kills over 10 million people in the next few decades, it's most likely to be a highly infectious virus rather than a war. So next time we might not be so lucky. You can have a virus where people feel well enough while they're infectious that they get on a plane or they go to a market.
Or they go to a market.
That they get on a plane or they go to a market. The source of the virus could be a natural epidemic like Ebola, or it could be bioterrorism.
Yep. Hey, Mr. Bill Gates, what else we got? Jeffrey Epstein discusses Bill Gates and his vaccine cartel, therefore explaining that this would allow additional money for vaccines. Okay, from Jeffrey, to Mary Weirdos. Yes, that is easy as long as it is given emotional credit where due. They are a very sensitive bunch that has spent billions separate from polio. For as little that can be held up as a great success, even polio is not yet finished. They're trying to find a way to make sure they can really sell this idea of worldwide vaccinations for a pandemic. Therefore, explaining this would allow additional money for vaccines must be included in the presentation. What were they talking about? Here it is. On September 11th, 2015, Margaret Chan, Director General of the WHO, delivered the opening address at a conference secretly funded, directed, and operationally controlled by Jeffrey Epstein himself. The Director General of the World Health Organization delivered the opening address at a conference secretly funded, directed, and operationally controlled by Jeffrey Epstein. The proof has been sitting in the Federal Archive for 2 months. No outlet has touched it until today. You could see it right there. So the Rothschild Conference, I heard about this, on health and security. The planet is facing challenges to biological security, including pandemic diseases, urgent diseases, or accidental or deliberately perpetuated outbreaks. Blah, 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 blah. Jeffrey Epstein, Bill Gates. Speaking of Bill Gates.
Prepare for the next one. That, I'd say is, will get attention this time.
Watch the body language.
Prepare for the next one. That,
trying to hold his smile back.
I'd say is, will get attention this time.
So pleased with himself. I don't trust this guy for a second. I don't know about you guys, but he's got his hands in too many places, making money off of too many horrible things. Okay, so now, Fauci fraudulently claimed ivermectin did not work, so the government could inject the entire population with emergency use authorized gene therapies. In order for him to get emergency use authorization, we talked about this last episode, Fauci had to be able to claim that there was no other medicine or treatment that worked on COVID. And that's what he did. That was the recommendations that he gave. Now we have 106 studies involving 200,000 plus patients show ivermectin reduced mortality by 47%, reduced hospitalization by 34%, reduced cases by 79%, increased viral clearance by 44%, improved recovery by 39%. And there is a lot more to it. You guys can look this up. Senator Ron Johnson spoke about this on July 29th at the Senate hearing. Let me pull this all the way back. Here we go.
I've got the studies right here. There was a website that was tracking the random controlled studies. Here they are, showing 60-70% efficacy of ivermectin. The same day you say there's no evidence, there was all kinds of evidence. Loved ones had to go to hospitals, had to sue hospitals. Just would you try it? So I would want to know, to what extent were you involved in sabotaging hydroxychloroquine, ivermectin, and did you do that because you knew the only way you get an emergency use authorization for these drugs, these experimental gene therapy, was if there was no effective treatment, you couldn't get the emergency use authorization. So is that why you helped sabotage cheap generic drugs in favor of remdesivir, which, by the way, nurses, are you aware of the fact that nurses called it run, death is near?
Wow. Remdesivir, the nurses called run, death is near.
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my right.
That's disturbing because that's like a gallows humor trauma response to the horrors happening around them that they even came up with that joke. And there he is spitting the Fifth Amendment for
To answer based upon my rights under the
100th time. Okay, so we got that evidence. Now let's look at this. RFK Jr. explains why Fauci had such a problem with early treatments like ivermectin. Quote, Tony Fauci's problem is this. There's a little-known federal law that says you cannot give emergency use authorization to a vaccine if there is any medication approved for any purpose that is shown effective against the target disease. So if Tony Fauci or anybody had admitted that hydroxychloroquine or ivermectin are effective against COVID, it would have been illegal for them to give emergency use authorization to the vaccines, and they could have never gotten them approved. And then they wouldn't have made billions and billions of dollars. And a $200 billion, there it is, and a $200 billion enterprise would have collapsed. $200 billion enterprise. Wow. Okay, there's that. Now, Pfizer itself has finally published the list of side effects from the COVID vaccine. Here we are, blood clot, acute kidney injury, acute flaccid myelitis, positive anti-sperm antibodies, brainstem embolism, brainstem thrombosis, cardiac arrest, hundreds of cases, heart failure, cardiac ventricular thrombosis, cardiogenic shock, central nervous system vasculitis, neonatal death, deep vein thrombosis, it just goes on and on. Turbo cancers. God. Okay. Now, Senator Ron Johnson here, at this point in the hearing, pulls up a chart comparing adverse effects amongst vaccines in the middle of Anthony Fauci's hearing. He then starts reading out the most damning statistics related to the COVID jab directly to Fauci's face. And Fauci,
I was going to ask you, were you carefully monitoring the safety surveillance systems like VAERS and VSafe that literally were deluged with complaints? Currently, worldwide, there have been almost 1.7 million adverse events reported to the VAERS system. Of those, over 39,000 were deaths. And of those deaths, 24% occur on the day of vaccination within 1 or 2 days. 24%, which, by the way, just happens to be the same percentage that a Rasmussen poll pointed out. 24% of the American public believe they know somebody who died of the experimental gene therapy. So again, I was certainly interested in asking you whether or not you were following this as carefully as I was. It's not my responsibility to follow safety surveillance systems, but I did. And by the way, when I published, this is actual government information. When I published it and people had me on their shows, they would be censored by Facebook. They would be deplatformed. I think largely at the behest of the actions you took to make sure that disinformation wasn't spread. This wasn't disinformation.
Jesus Christ.
I always like to say, if we had surveyed 2 years ago in the public, would you be willing to take gene or cell therapy and inject it into your body? We would have probably had a 95% refusal rate. I think.
Yeah. This is a pharma exec at the World Health Summit spilling the truth while laughing how they manipulated acceptance. Wow, Bayer. Okay. Yeah, dude, this is crazy. Listen to what he just said, executive.
The mRNA vaccines are an example for that cell and gene therapy. I always like to say, if we had surveyed 2 years ago,
they reclassified it as a vaccine, even though it doesn't fit the definition of a vaccine. It's a gene therapy.
In the public, would you be willing to take
so when they asked the public, would you be
gene or
willing
cell
to take
therapy and inject it into your body, we would have probably had a 95% refusal.
So he's basically coming up with the metaphor saying, you know, I used to make this argument all the time. If you asked a bunch of people if they would be willing to take a gene therapy into their body, you'd have like a 95% disapproval rate.
I think the mRNA vaccines are an example for that cell and gene therapy. I always like to say, if we had surveyed 2 years ago, the public, would you be willing to take
a gene therapy? Yeah, but if you call it a vaccine and then avoid calling it gene therapy, of course they're going to adopt it. And then you like make people out to be crazy for calling it a gene therapy, saying there could be anything wrong with that. Okay, so this is the former CDC director, Robert Redfield, confirming by oath that they were hiding the side effects of the COVID-19 vaccines. And here's some quotes from this interview. There were inappropriate decisions by some to try and underreport any side effects because they argued that would make the public less likely to get vaccinated. They wanted to have like one narrative. One of the greatest mistakes that was made was mandating these vaccines. They should have never been mandated. They don't prevent infection. They do have side effects. So here he is. This is the former CDC director. This is one of the foremost experts on the planet. So here we are.
Dr. Redfield, you pointed to the lab leak theory even before we did.
He pointed to lab leak theory even
January
before.
2020, you expressed concerns to Dr. Fauci, to
expressed his concerns to Dr.
Jeremy
Fauci.
Farrar of UK's Wellcome Trust, and to Dr. Tedros of World Health Organization that, quote, we had to take the lab leak hypothesis with extreme
the lab leak hypothesis seriously.
And you urged Dr. Fauci to investigate both the lab and the natural hypotheses. Shortly thereafter, on February 1st, Farrar convened a meeting of a group of 11 top scientists across
Dr. Fauci
to join, and he wrote, quote, my preference is to keep this group really tight.
He said, my preference is to keep this group really tight.
Obviously, asked everyone to treat in total confidence. Dr. Redfield, you were excluded from this call, but up until then, you had been on...
Okay, so, yeah, Fauci said, Dr. Redfield, you are excluded from this call, but up until then, he had been involved in every single other conversation and call beforehand.
You were included in every other conversation. What changed? Why do you think that you were excluded from these conversations?
Why do you think you were excluded?
Thank you very much. I think just to emphasize, in early to mid-January, I did calls with Fauci about how important I thought it was at science in pursuing both hypotheses. I also expressed as a clinical virologist, I felt it was not scientifically plausible that this virus went from a bat to human and became one of the most infectious viruses. All viruses are not the same. So when you look at coronaviruses, when they entered the human species, they never learned how to go human to human. Even to this day, they don't know how to go human. So you can't equate Ebola with a coronavirus.
Now, why do you think you were excluded from those calls?
Because it was told to me that they wanted a single narrative, and that I obviously...
They wanted a single narrative. They wanted to scare the shit out of everybody. They wanted to make sure they took the vaccine.
Okay. In emails following the conference call, 4 of the 11 scientists told Fauci that they all found the genetic sequence inconsistent with expectations from evolutionary theory, basically what you're saying.
Okay. Whoa.
Okay. In emails following the conference call, 4 of the 11 scientists told Fauci that
4 of the 11 scientists told Fauci.
They all found the genetic sequence inconsistent with expectations from evolutionary theory, basically what you're saying.
Inconsistent with evolutionary theory.
However, just 3 days later, these 4 scientists had drafted a paper arguing the exact opposite, and that's now the...
But then those same 4 scientists drafted a paper that argued the exact opposite immediately afterwards. What the heck? So somebody got to them.
Our investigation showed this paper was prompted by Dr. Fauci, among
Oh my God. Okay, so their investigation shows this paper was prompted by Dr. Fauci.
To disprove the lab leak theory. What is the likelihood that these scientists came across additional information just 3 days after making these statements to conclude with such certainty?
Wow. So what is the likelihood that those scientists came across new information just 3 days later that would cause them to totally dismiss lab leak hypothesis altogether, no longer follow the scientific method?
That COVID-19 came from nature instead of the lab leak that they thought it was 3 days earlier.
Yeah, I think it's unfortunate. Again, I've said this before, that this whole approach that was taken on February 1st and subsequently in the month of February, if you really want to be truthful, it's antithetical to science.
Thank you.
Science has debate, and they squashed any debate.
Given what we know now and looking at all the conversations in February of 2020 and before the release of the paper, do you think that Dr. Fauci used this paper to hide the gain-of-function research created,
gain-of-function research?
Virus?
I can't talk about Fauci's motive.
He's being intellectually honest.
Do you think that the paper does hide the truth?
I think it's an inaccurate paper that basically was part of a narrative that they were creating. Remember, this pandemic did not start in the seafood market. We now know there was infections all the way back into It was decided that they were going to say this came from the wet market, and they were going to do everything.
There was a narrative decided they were going to say this came from a wet market.
To negate any discussion about the possibility that this came
and they're going to do everything they could to negate any possibility of discussions otherwise.
Dr. Fauci was affirmatively told in an email that NIAID had a monetary relationship with the Wuhan Institute through EcoHealth Alliance.
We were funding it with our tax dollars. They hid all of this. Fauci lied about this. under oath.
He was told this in January 27th of 2020. Do you think that Dr. Fauci intentionally lied under oath to Senator Paul when he vehemently denied NIH's funding of gain-of-function research?
I think there's no doubt that NIH was funding gain-of-function research.
There's no doubt that NIH was funding gain-of-function research.
Is it likely that American tax dollars funded the gain-of-function research that created this virus?
I think it did, not only from NIH, but from the State Department, USAID, and from DOD.
I'm out of time.
There it
Thank
is.
you very much.
Okay, guys, there it is. I hope you guys could hear that one okay. And once again, guys, this is here for your family, your friends, for anybody that you want to share this with. So now, Rand Paul ejects Fauci's attorney from the Senate hearing, one of his several attorneys, after the lawyer repeatedly refused to stop speaking without being recognized. The guy wasn't even supposed to be sitting next to Fauci on the bench. There's a bench for the lawyers behind Fauci where they can still easily tap him on the shoulder and talk to him. But this guy wanted to sit right next to him to whisper in his ear the whole time. And he's not supposed to do that. You're not allowed to do that. They finally kicked him out, but they really gave the guy more chances than they needed to. But listen to this. This is crazy.
We're going to finish with this question. And it's based really on that statement, that general statement in your support for gain of function, the idea that the benefits outweigh the risks. So there are many other people who disagree. They aren't politicians. They're not, I don't know what party they're in. David Relman is probably one of the most esteemed. And he is a scientist at Stanford. He, I think, has classified clearance. He's been a consultant to our government probably for a decade or more. And he's written about this publicly. He says the opposite. He said that the risks of this research do not outweigh the benefits. He said the risk, we shouldn't do it. Richard Ebright, who's been involved in this debate for 2 decades, says the same thing. Says we really shouldn't be doing this at all. There's a quote also by Kevin Esvelt, who's a CRISPR scientist at MIT, also wrote about this gain of function. I implore every scientist, funder, and nation working in the field, please stop. No more trying to discover or make pandemic-capable viruses. No more experiments likely to disseminate blueprints for plagues.
Really?
Dr. Fauci, would you like to at least answer this one question for us today and let us know whether or not you've changed your mind on whether or not the benefits of gain-of-function research outweigh the risks?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
The chairman has denied your assertion of privilege and directed you to answer, but you nonetheless refuse and stand on privilege despite the existence of the pardon.
Yeah, he's not allowed to be standing on privilege. He's already been given immunity here, so he could tell the truth, and he couldn't be convicted for anything. The fact that he keeps hitting on that Fifth Amendment tells us that there is such super incriminating evidence out there that were he to admit it, then an entire house of cards would fall down. So other people are also obviously pressuring him, and he himself doesn't want to lose his legacy. He's going to try and hope that this gets swept under the rug and he gets protected by whoever his betters
You will
are.
have to consider after this hearing what appropriate action should be taken against you for the failure to testify after being directed to do so. It's against the law to obstruct an investigation of Congress. There will be repercussions to your refusal to testify today.
Yeah, you can go to jail for this.
You're not recognized. You're not recognized. If you are unruly, you will be removed from the proceeding. You are not recognized, and you are not recognized, sir. Sir, you are not recognized.
And here it is.
You are not recognized. Security, we'll hold off. But you will respect these proceedings. You were told not to sit at the table. You insist on sitting at the table, and we told you you would not be recognized. You are not invited here for testimony, sir. You are being disruptive. Would you behave this way in a courtroom? No, because the judge would put you in jail. I can't do that today, but I can have you escorted from the premises. So I would say, sir, sit quietly and don't say another word. I said, sit quietly. You are not recognized. Another word and you're gone.
Well, look at this bug.
So, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to hear what the attorney has to say.
He is not recognized by the committee or the chair. If he speaks again,
Wow.
he will be removed from the room. This testimony is from Anthony Fauci. This is not a game with his lawyers. He can advise. His lawyers can give him advice. He's got a half dozen here. They're all allowed to talk to him.
Yes.
All right? But the attorneys are not recognized. In fact, the attorney was told not to sit at the table, and he's not obeying that recommendation. There's a row behind you, sir. That's where you were told to sit, and you're not. And now you're disrupting the proceedings. And so, look, this is the way Anthony Fauci wants to be remembered. For a lawyer not listening to the rules. That's the way you want to be remembered, and that's what you're going to do.
He keeps
You are
trying to
not
talk.
recognized, sir. Security, please remove him from the room.
Yeah, they just keep trying to talk. And he thinks that they're going to get some good media moment for this or something. What?
I'm going to give you one more opportunity to comply with the law. Limited to the period of your pardon, at any point between January 1st, 2014 and January 19th, 2025, did you destroy any federal record or tell anyone else to?
Under the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Given that you have a unlimited presidential pardon, what is your specific objection that you are making?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
My question was limited to the period of your pardon only. I find your objection unsupported and direct you to answer the question.
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Because you refused to answer, citing a privilege that is unsupported because of your pardon, and after being denied to do so, this committee has scheduled a vote next week on a resolution certifying your contempt.
Yes. There you go, buddy. Why wouldn't he say anything? Now, here's Senator Hawley going off on Fauci. This is pretty good. There's some good points in here.
Constitution.
What color tie are you wearing?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
What color is the carpet in front of you?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Let's just get one thing straight. You don't have any rights under the Fifth Amendment because you've been pardoned, as you very well know. As the Supreme Court has been clear for a century and more, Brown versus Walker, 1896, when he has been pardoned, he may not stand upon his privilege. You know that. Your lawyers sitting behind you now shifting nervously in their chairs. They know it. This isn't about the Constitution. This isn't about the law. This is about contempt. Contempt for this body and contempt for the American people. But I think I know why you're doing it. It's because you don't want to answer questions. It's because you did all kinds of terrible things. It's because during the pandemic you got rich, didn't you? You got rich while people were dying, hundreds of thousands of Americans, over 1 million in the end, and you were getting rich. And not only were you doing that, you were using federal employees with taxpayer money to apply for and solicit cash prizes for you personally. Cash prizes totaling over $1 million. You did all of that during the pandemic, didn't you? That's a question.
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
You remember Greg Folkers? Who was that?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Your chief of staff is the answer. Do you remember Patricia Conrad? Who was that?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
She was your personal assistant. And what were these individuals doing in the depth of the pandemic in November of 2020 when millions of Americans were suffering from COVID? What were they doing? I tell you what they're doing. Folkers was on your behalf soliciting and gathering information for a cash award. Let's look at it. We've got his email right here, right over my shoulder. Folkers says, I'm working on this nomination for the Dan David Award for Fauci. We need to beef up the COVID part. Do you have language in the can that you can share that delineates how we responded in new ways to COVID? He sends this to multiple...
You have language in the can that you could share that delineates how we responded in many ways to COVID. Oh my God. I'm working on this nomination for the Dan David Award for Fauci. Need to beef up the COVID part.
Federal employees. What was the Dan David Award? Do you remember, Doc?
Where were your assistants putting you up for an award?
Advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
It was a $900,000 cash award. $900,000 cash award.
Oh, wow.
And he got it because he used federal employees to get it. And this wasn't the only award, was it, Dr. Fauci? In fact, you applied for and received at least 8 other federal cash prizes on federal time using federal employees and federal resources. Here they are over my shoulder. Besides the Dan David Award, you've got the Partnership for Public Service, you've got the Adelson Prize, you've got the Smithsonian Award, you've got the National Academy of Medicine Award, you've got the CDC Foundation. In fact, you turned your staff into a full-time application machine. You actually wrote to people and said, do you think maybe I qualify? And you got cash for all of this.
Oh my God.
And it wasn't just 1 or 2 employees, was it? In fact, you used 8 separate federal employees on federal time using federal resources to solicit cash awards. Isn't that true?
Wow.
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Here they are right over my shoulder. Here's all of them. The people that you use, federal employees, so that you could go and get cash money. And the most hilarious part is that you weren't content to even dragoon them into applying for all of these cash awards. You then had them go out to the ethics agencies and ethics watchdogs and demand that you be able to get the money. That's right. We've got it in your emails. Your staff and employees on federal time, using federal resources, being paid with federal dollars, are soliciting cash for you. And then they're turning around and saying to the agency, we don't want just an answer. We want to get to yes, because Fauci wants the money. He wants it. We want to get to yes, and yes takes time. This is your chief of staff again, using federal email to pressure the agency's own ethics people so that you can get money, so that you can get rich. And it violated the law, didn't it, Dr. Fauci? Didn't it? It violated the law, didn't it? It is a question. You can answer. Go ahead.
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Federal law, as you very well know, prohibits the solicitation of cash awards or other personal benefits for federal employees. And it certainly prohibits using your own employees to do this. 5 CFR section 2635-205B. It says it right there in black and white. You cannot use federal resources, federal dollars, federal employees, federal offices, federal email, federal time to solicit cash awards. And you did all of it. And the worst part is thousands of people were dying while you were doing it. You were supposed to be the nation's doctor, and you're playing one on TV. But this is what you were doing with your time.
I got to thank our man Hawley here. Really give that Fauci.
True.
You got
on the advice of counsel,
true. Playing one on thousands of people were dying while you were doing it. You were supposed to be the nation's doctor, and you're playing one on TV. But this is what you were doing with your time. Isn't that true?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Yeah, I can see why. I can certainly see why. You know what I can't quite figure out is that why you were so obsessed with it, because you're already rich. I mean, your scheme worked here. I mean, your net worth now is north of $12 million. You got over $1 million in cash awards during COVID, during a 12-month, 24-month span during COVID. $1 million you knocked down in cash money using federal resources. Now you're worth more than $12 million. You got a pension that in its first year paid out north of $400,000 a year. 1 million people dead, you're getting rich. 1 million people dead, you're using federal employees to get cash awards for you. 1 million people dead, and you're here taking the fifth because you don't want to admit that what really happened in all that time was a multi-month, multi-year course of self-dealing. Isn't that true, Dr. Fauci?
Wow.
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Yeah, well, silence is admission. And here's the real thing. At the end of the day, it wasn't just about the money, really, was it? It was really about a power trip. I mean, through all of this, you want to be the most famous scientist in the world. You were so focused on getting every award and every drop of cash that you could, all because you wanted to be on TV. You wanted to be the sun god of science. You wanted to be the guy who was in charge of it all. You wanted to lambast Trump. You wanted to make sure that nobody else stole your spotlight. You wanted to be the guy. You had time to sit for InStyle magazine. Here's what you were doing with your time. You could sit for InStyle magazine, but you can't answer questions for the American people. You could sit for InStyle magazine, but you're here taking the fifth. You could sit for InStyle magazine and get $1 million in cash awards. But now the cat's got your tongue. I bet he does. I tell you what, here's my conclusion from all this. This was really all about you the whole time. Somewhere along the way, you lost your way. You may have been a good public servant at one time, I don't know. But I can tell you from reading your emails now, from looking at what you did, how you used your employees, somewhere along the line, it became all about you. You became a narcissist and a megalomaniac and a liar. And you've lied to the American people, and you've lied to this body. And you've disgraced your profession by doing it. You called yourself the most famous scientist in the world. You've done more to harm science than anybody in my lifetime. And I hope you'll go home and write that in your diary.
Wow, man, he really got his attention there at the end. You see him twitching and
really all
fiddling.
about you the whole time. Somewhere along the way, you lost your way. You may have been a good public servant at one time, I don't know. But I can tell you from reading your emails now, from looking at what you did, how you used your employees, somewhere along the line, it became all about you. You became
disgusting dudes. All right, guys. Rand Paul also went scorched earth on Dr. Fauci, and we're just going to kind of get part of this one here.
While privately, he was well aware of a mountain of evidence suggesting the virus originated in the lab. The American people deserve answers. The American people deserve to know why dangerous research was funded by NIAID in a totalitarian country, in a lab that lacked acceptable safety standards. The decision to fund dangerous gain-of-function research in Wuhan standards, AID in a totalitarian country, know why dangerous research was funded by NIAID in a totalitarian country, in a lab that lacked acceptable safety standards. The decision to fund dangerous gain-of-function research in Wuhan, China, will likely go down in history as perhaps one of the worst public health decisions. Frankly, the American people deserve an apology. I hope today Dr. Fauci will come clean, admit it was a mistake to fund dangerous research in China, admit that the risk of this dangerous research exceeded any possible benefits, ask forgiveness, and pledge to help our government devise safeguards so a man-made epidemic never happens again. Instead of an apology, you have for years avoided responsibility. Regarding the lockdowns, you argue that you did not personally issue every lockdown order, close every school, or impose every mandate. But officials across the country invoked your authority to justify these decisions. And you presented your recommendations not as judgments open to debate, but as dictates of science itself. Your own words demonstrate that you understood the influence you exercised. On March 14th, 2020, you wrote that the task force recommendations were driven by me, yourself, Deb, and CDC. The next day, you wrote that you had convinced Mayor Bill de Blasio to close the New York City schools, so you were involved. That same night, Governor Gavin Newsom's chief of staff told you that the governor had decided to close California schools, bars, and restaurants after watching you on television. Presidents, governors, mayors, school boards, corporations, and Congress all bear responsibility for the decisions they made. The COVID lockdown, however, could never have been inflicted without you aiding and abetting the crime. Children lost education. Small businesses built over a lifetime disappeared. Patients delayed cancer screenings and other medical care. Families were separated from dying relatives. Workers were ordered to accept a medical procedure or lose their jobs. Worship assembly, employment, education, and travel were restricted in the name of science. While you did not impose every restriction, you used your public authority to justify them. While you concluded publicly that COVID occurred naturally, your private record tells a different story. In early 2020, your hand-picked virologist warned that the virus appeared to have been manipulated in the lab. In a conference call concerning the origin of the virus, all but 2 of the participants believed deliberate insertion was possible. Your concern was not merely theoretical. That same week, you led an urgent effort to determine whether your own agency had funded the research related to these experiments that were now under suspicion. Hours later, your assistant reported that the Wuhan experiments had indeed been reviewed and approved by the NIH. Those were not the actions of officials who believed that a research-related origin was an absurd conspiracy theory. They were the actions of officials urgently trying to determine whether their agency funding was connected to the research under discussion, connected to the pandemic. You could not hide that your agency had funded the Wuhan research or your long history of defending gain-of-function research. The only alternative left was to argue that COVID-19 did not originate in the Wuhan lab. You were not a detached observer. You had an institutional interest in the public believing that federally funded research had nothing to do with the pandemic. It was a conflict of interest from the very beginning. The authors of the proximal origin of SARS-CoV-2 privately had serious doubts about a natural origin. Within days, though, they flipped, and they all wrote in proximal origin that the virus was almost certainly not a laboratory construct. That paper was then used by the government and the media and you to discredit Americans who were asking the same questions that you and the authors were asking yourselves privately. You even cited proximal origin from the White House podium. You held it out as evidence that the virus could not have been engineered. But you didn't disclose your role in the discussions that preceded the writing of the paper. You did not disclose the author's original concerns. You did not reveal that you had been part of the paper, that you had read and offered editorial comment on the paper before it was published, before you began using it as evidence that it couldn't have originated in the lab. You did not disclose that you had immediately investigated yourself whether NIAID funding might be connected to the research. You did not tell the American people the full story. Duly released private messages indicate that the doubts with the authors and others didn't disappear after the publication. So while this was being waived at the White House to show that it couldn't come from the lab, the authors were still privately continuing to assign a meaningful probability to a laboratory origin. One thing in public and another in private. Some of the same scientists discussed avoiding email and carefully managing communications that might eventually be obtained under the Freedom of Information Act. The pattern is straightforward. Privately, there was alarm, then an immediate inquiry to see if NIAID's possible exposure to funding, then a rapid public declaration of certainty, continued private doubt, and then years of resistance to disclosure. The question is why? The only logical answer is that your primary concern was avoiding culpability. Your primary concern was hiding the fact that you had approved the funding for this dangerous research. Your support of gain-of-function research is extensive and long-standing. In 2011, your agency funded Ron Fauci's laboratory when it mutated the avian flu until it could spread through the air between mammals.
Well,
this was the tipping point. This is when others became worried. You funded this. You advocated for this. The federal government's own biosecurity board, though, recommended withholding the details of these experiments because of the danger the research posed. People were concerned that publishing it was publishing a roadmap to creating bioweapons around the world. But you sided with the gain-of-function scientist Fauci and argued that the benefits of publishing the research far outweighed the risks. You defended this avian flu transmissibility experiments as critical research.
The existential risk our species faces for allowing this kind of research to go on is bewildering. Like, just let yourself even begin to think about what it means that there are dozens of labs around the world adding functions to superviruses to make them have more easy access to be able to mutate them to be able to access human tissue. That's insane, because if any of these gets out and they're worse than COVID, remember what we just went through with COVID. Remember the very beginning of COVID and how terrifying it was for everybody and how we all closed off. I remember sitting in my apartment in that first week and hearing someone walk down the street with a bad cough and being worried about it. Like, holy crap, there's someone with it right there. It's like a zombie apocalypse had just begun. I'm like, oh crap. You know, we were really nervous. We were all really scared. We were washing the plastic wrapping on our groceries when we got home. Like, we were really all going out pretty hard on this and all wearing masks and everything. We were all trying to be safe. We were, you know, listening to the media and the recommendations from people like Fauci. But then you hear all this.
You wrote that even if a scientist
belief.
became infected and triggered a pandemic, the benefits of the gain-of-function experiments outweighed the risk. In 2014, your agency, NIAID, began funding the Wuhan bat coronavirus work. In 2015, Ralph Barrick and the Chinese scientist Shi Zhengli published NIAID-supported research combining a bat coronavirus spike protein with a SARS backbone. The resulting virus could infect human airway cells. It's a novel virus that now can infect human cells. It gained transmissibility. It gained function. In 2018, the same group of scientists, EcoHealth, Barrick, Shi, and their collaborators submitted the DIFFUSE proposal, which involved the insertion of a Furin cleavage site into the coronavirus. DARPA rejected it as too dangerous. When COVID was sequenced, though, early on in January of 2020, within days, scientists discovered that, lo and behold, it had a novel Furin cleavage site, just as had been proposed in the DIFFUSE project. This was either an extraordinary coincidence or a smoking gun, evidence that the Chinese had created COVID-19. It made the laboratory origin question more legitimate, and it made your categorical public denials indefensible. On May 11th, 2021, you told the Senate, the NIH has never, ever, and does not now fund gain-of-function research in Wuhan, in the Wuhan Institute of Virology. When I gave you the opportunity to correct the record, to reconsider the statement, you responded that you had never before lied to Congress. We were then told that only the government's narrowest regulation of definition counted here, that you could define gain of function in one way in which this wasn't gain of function, in which all of the common sense of the world would be thrown out, all of the idea that the mice were dying and the virus was more transmissible didn't matter because you had a technical definition that allowed you to fund it. But the real question is, was it dangerous? Was it a wise decision to fund this? And you haven't deviated from that. You've never admitted that it could have been a mistake funding this research in China. The American people weren't asking for a semantics debate over what is gain of function. They're asking
in a country that's under an authoritarian government.
Common sense say this research was dangerous.
In a lab that's been known to have issues
in Wuhan. They wanted to know whether their money-funded experiments in Wuhan that made bat coronaviruses better able to infect humans. The answer is yes. They wanted to know whether NIAID adequate, and they're asking, does common sense say this research was dangerous in Wuhan? They wanted to know whether their money-funded experiments in Wuhan that made bat coronaviruses better able to infect humans. The answer is yes. They wanted to know whether NIAID adequately supervised their work. The answer is no. When you defended this research, you described its benefits in the broadest terms. But when Congress demanded accountability, you hid behind the narrowest possible definition. You can't have it both ways. Your conduct concerning federal records raises further questions. It is a crime to destroy federal records. Yet our investigation reveals your assistant diligently reported that she deleted tons of emails. In 2024, you testified that you did not delete federal records. Who's telling the truth? You or your assistant? The committee has obtained repeated instructions from you telling federal officials to delete communications. On February 2nd, 2020, one day after Origin's call, you told Francis Collins, please delete this email after you read it. The committee asked for your voluntary cooperation to come today. Your appearance had to be compelled by subpoena. You're here today under duress. You're here today because of the court ordering it. President Biden issued you a sweeping pardon, extending back to 2014, the same pardon he gave to his son, Hunter. A pardon may
2014
protect a person from criminal prosecution, doesn't rewrite history. It does not erase documents. It does not convert a misleading statement into a truthful one. And it does not prevent Congress from establishing what happened. There will be another pandemic. There will be another crisis. And there will again be officials who insist that uncertainty must be hidden for the public's own good.
2014 is when Dr. Fauci began his gain-of-function research, if I remember correctly, so that makes sense.
They will demand obedience. They will invoke science. I am the science, as though it were a commandment.
I am the science.
They will argue that government officials cannot be questioned because questioning them would undermine public trust. They have it backwards. It is secrecy that destroys trust. It is arrogance that destroys trust. It is censorship that destroys trust. And it is the refusal to admit error that destroys trust.
Yep, amen. Well said. Let's move on to our next here. So the Gates Foundation Oh, this is a crazy one. This one is documented. This gentleman is an epidemiologist. He's been doing a lot of good work. Nick Holscher. Thank you, Nick. Gates Foundation just developed a mark of the beast, microneedle implants that install permanent quantum dot markings, basically a QR code in your body, a miniaturized QR code, and mRNA into your body. Planned for deployment during the next pandemic, a biological vaccine passport controlling who can shop, dine, or travel. If you don't have the vaccine, you can't go anywhere. China style. So let's move through this one right quick.
It's a literal QR code. You will be marked. This lasts, again, for years, perhaps permanently. And this will be used as a biological vaccine passport system where you won't use your phone. You won't use the QR code on your
And this
phone.
is from children'shealthdefense.tv, guys. Look it up.
To enter the store and travel, you will use your wrist where this material is embedded in your body. And so this is very dangerous vaccine platform that they try and roll out at a wide scale. So first in 2019, Gates funded a study for the original development of these quantum dot implants. So it's a microneedle patch array. So it's got a bunch of mini needles. It's like a Band-Aid. You put it on your wrist, it dissolves, and it installs these quantum dot materials that last for at least 5 years. So they developed that in 2019. Now in 2025, Gates funded another study that shows just how advanced now this technology has become. It is advancing at a very fast pace. Now these microneedle patches can install literal quantum dot QR codes that can be read with AI with specialized cameras and decoded to store batch information, lot number, how many doses you received. This is planned for wide-scale deployment for another.
That is sketchy as hell. There he is, getting ready to make more money off the next pandemic. God damn, guys. Wow. Okay, that's real? What? Yeah. New Gates, okay, and there's an article on it from the Focal Points. New Gates funded microneedle patch implant installs both mRNA and quantum dot markings into the body. Great. Okay. Oh, God. And there's the whole article, guys. You should look this one up. I'm not going to make it through it tonight because I want to try and keep this somewhat concise, but the article is on thefocalpoints.com. You're looking for the article titled New Gates Funded Microneedle Patch Implant Installs Both mRNA and Quantum Dot Markings into the Body by Nicholas Holscher. Wow. Okay. So there's all the proof of the pudding. Look that up, fam. I'll try and remember to put that in the description of this video for you guys too. And then we have Mr. Tom Fitton of Judicial Watch. We found the documents on his agency funding creation of coronavirus mutants in Wuhan. There's just more proof for you guys that this was.
But you can see I've given you. But you can see I've given you proof positive information, as confirmed by NIH, NIAID, etc., that they were funding mutant viruses, the creation of mutant viruses, the very definition of gain-of-function research. And what was the result? I think it was COVID-19. Now, do I know that for a fact? Of course I don't.
We don't know.
But it stands to reason, don't you agree?
But it stands to reason, don't you agree? Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, what else would it be for? It's coronavirus, specifically mutations of coronavirus in Wuhan. SARS-CoV-2 just so happened to start in Wuhan, China. You guys remember the chocolate factory joke that Jon Stewart made on the Colbert Show, I hope. I mean, come on, guys. Why were we gaslit about it being a lab leak? Hey, we made it, guys. We made it to the very end. I've got through everything here. Guys, thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of Actuali Podcast and our Meaning Making 101 series here, where we try to make sense of this world together. I encourage you guys to get in the comments if you have anything that you have any doubts about or you want to correct me on. Please do so in the comments. I just want to know what the truth is, and I'm happy to update my belief set at any time here. You know, we're just getting closer to what the truth is. That's all that matters here, fam. So we can find out what is good and true for one and all. We can change this world from the inside out. We can learn to orient a little bit better. We can be that change we wish to see. And we can encourage others to do so as well. So thank you, guys. I know the COVID debacle was a traumatic event for all of us. So I'm actually very heartened to be able to share this with all of you guys. I hope that you do go out there and share it with your family and friends. If you had questions during COVID, this one's for you guys, and this one will hopefully help open the hearts and minds of others who were quite convinced. So much love, fam. Thank you so much for tuning in. Make sure to like and subscribe. Share this with everybody you know. And let's make sure that we change this world by being that change we wish to see. Let's cease the hacking at limbs methodology. It just doesn't work. You know, we try and attack the symptoms and we never treat the root. And the root is within every single one of us. If we can change ourselves and we can be that change we wish to see, we can truly, dutifully, with determination, really try and be good and better people and be willing to update our points of view when new information comes along and we set that example for others. I really do think that we can radically change this world for the better. Even a 1% lightening of the load would be amazing. You know, if we can just decrease the amount of stress and worry and concern and anger on this planet even a tiny bit, I think that makes a huge difference. You know, there's a lot of young people in this world growing up right now wondering why the adults cannot seem to get along and they're just calling each other names and fighting. We got to do better, fam. So let's do that. I love you guys. Thank you so much once again for tuning in. I will see you on the flip side. Peace out.